Hello again, welcome back. We are now on module 25, which is the last module for this unit of sensation and perception. And this module covers the other senses. So our three remaining senses are touch, taste, and smell. And I will do my best to get through these pretty quickly. I know that the hearing video was pretty lengthy, so sorry about that. I'll try to do a little quicker with this one. Thankfully, these three are a bit easier to understand and work a little more simply in our bodies. So starting with the sense of touch, there are really just four main different sensations we have that kind of influence everything else we feel, and those are pressure, warmth, cold, and pain. Everything else that we feel are really just combinations of those four main senses of touch. So the part in your brain that's most active with the sense of touch is the somatosensory cortex. So if you remember in your brain, you have kind of two strips right in the middle. The front one is the motor cortex. So that is your brain telling your body to give output information of move like this. And then the strip behind that is the somatosensory cortex, which is taking incoming information of you touch something, then it gets sent to your brain, and so your brain then decides what to do with that. Maybe then triggers your motor cortex to say, move your hand away, that thing was hot, something like that. So think back to those brain structures that we had commented on before. So the way that we understand pain is both a bottom up and top down process. So again, this unit all ties together. All those things we learned in the very beginning now comes into play as we're going through each of these senses. So pain is really a biopsychosocial event. And so that's how we are going to talk through these different understandings of pain next. So pain experiences vary widely from group to group and person to person because of the fact that it's a biopsychosocial kind of thing. So remember those three parts. Biological is what are like the genetic things, what are the things actually going on inside your body. The psychological is kind of what's going on in your brain, what is your mind telling you. And then finally, sociocultural is what is society and culture telling you? What are different things going on in your environment that influence your experiences? So these three things work together to influence our perception of pain. So starting with the biological, we have sensory receptors that are called nociceptors, and those are mostly stored in your skin. So those can help to determine hurtful temperatures, pressure, or other chemicals. So basically, that's the real part of the sense of things that we have. You touch something, and certain nerves are then sent out. These nociceptors, they are your sensory receptors. So the way that a pain circuit works is first, for example, say really painful. You stepped on like a thumbtack that's really sharp. So first you step on that, then those pain sensory receptors are then sent through here to your spinal cord. Then your spinal cord sends the message to your brain of here's this input I just got, and now your brain then processes it and determines that that thing is pain that I'm feeling right now. So it's basically these three steps of starting with the sensory input here of your sensory receptors, then to your spinal cord, then to your brain. There's a theory called the gate control theory, and that is saying that your spinal cord has certain like neurological gate that kind of blocks pain signals or allows them to pass through to the brain. So you might feel specific things or you might have specific sensations, but then your spine kind of determines, am I going to send this information through to the brain to actually do something with it, or are we just kind of going to ignore this thing? So that gate is opened with activity of pain signals from small nerve fibers. So the gate is open with small nerve fibers, and that gate is closed by activity in larger fibers, like if you're feeling a massage or by other information coming in from the brain, like distracting thoughts. So the small nerve fibers are the things that are going to get through, and your brain's going to say, this is painful, I need to do something. But the larger nerve fibers or other distracting thoughts that you have are going to close that gate so that your body's like, oh, I'm just getting a massage. I feel something right now, but it's okay. It's not painful. There's kind of this weird thing called phantom limb pain, which is say in someone who has had to have a limb amputated, such as like your arm, sometimes that remaining part of your body then can still feel certain sensations as if that limb is still there. So your body basically is just misunderstanding certain sensory inputs that you have. So 7 in 10 people who have had limbs amputated tend to feel pain or movement in these non-existent limbs that are no longer there. So even though you don't actually have an arm there anymore, you might still kind of feel some kind of pain as if you did have an arm there. All right, so that was the biological side of pain. The psychological is impacted by a couple different things, such as how much attention you give to it. So if you are distracted with other things, this definitely diminishes the amount of pain that you can feel. And there are a lot of cool studies we can hopefully talk about in class that have to do with this. But if you are not paying attention to something, or think about if you have a lot of adrenaline pumping through you and you just did something crazy, a lot of people don't even notice until someone points out to them that like they might have just broken a bone or something like that. Or I've heard even police officers sometimes don't realize that they've been shot in the heat of the moment. It's not until afterwards that then they realize that like a bullet actually hit them, because your mind is distracted and focused on other things. Another way the psychological comes in is that memories that you have can influence how much pain you feel. So we've seen in studies that you tend to recall two main moments of pain throughout an experience. That is the peak pain point that you feel and how much you feel at the end. And we tend to, the thing that sticks out the most is kind of how much pain you do feel at the end. So even though it could have been really, really painful at a certain point, our memory tends to form based on whatever is the amount of pain you felt at the end of that event of whatever was going on. Finally, the sociocultural side of pain is things like if you experience empathy for other people's pains. So, sometimes you hear things of like sympathy pains or something, where, for example, if someone is pregnant and like feeling certain pains, sometimes the other person in the relationship might also kind of feel some pains or something. And it's kind of just this psychological thing that happens, but you're not actually sensing certain pain coming into you. The sociocultural also comes in with certain cultures, views, and perceptions of pain as well. So it kind of depends on what the thoughts are in your culture about how to respond to pain, and if you kind of just need to not really focus on it, that kind of thing. So pain is definitely not just a biological thing. It absolutely also has the psychological component and sociocultural as well. Some methods to help control pain include things like different drugs you might have, surgery, acupuncture, electrical stimulation, massage, exercise, all these different things, plenty of different things you can kind of use to either influence that biological side of things or that psychological side of things, and possibly even the sociocultural side of things too. There's some interesting studies that have been done as well with how placebos can reduce pain. So remember, placebos are kind of like a fake pill, a fake treatment that's given. So they had in this one study two different placebos that they pitted against each other. They had fake pills and pretend acupuncture. So the pretend acupuncture comes in with these needles that actually didn't puncture the skin, but they didn't tell the people that. And then they also had fake pills in other people that are like blue cornstarch pills. And they found that both groups actually reported less pain in the end, but the people with the fake acupuncture actually reported the greater pain drop. So your brain kind of even interprets like me physically feeling something on my skin, even though it was fake acupuncture. I determined that that must be healing me more so than necessarily just taking a pill that could potentially help. So it's definitely very interesting the way that your mind kind of play tricks on you with regards to pain. And as we said, distraction definitely makes a difference too. So something that is good and helpful that we can use this knowledge we have is that for burn victims, it can be incredibly painful to undergo skin repair and where you have to clean that burnt skin off and everything. So something that they can do is distract those patients with virtual reality so that then their mind is focused on something else, like this image here of I'm in some really cold environment here and there's snow around me, there's snowmen, igloos, so that you're focused on this feeling of cold rather than the feeling of actually what's going on to try to remove that burn. All right, so next up, after pain, we have two different chemical senses here, and those are taste and smell. So the official names for these two, taste is called gustation and smell is called olfaction. So let's kind of take a look at these, starting with taste now. For taste, we have five basic tastes that we can sense. We used to kind of think four, but we have recently added that there is kind of this fifth weird one here. So let's take a look at these. And these things exist for more than just your pleasure. They definitely have evolutionary benefits as well, such as bitter can help you potentially identify poisons, sour with toxic acids, those kinds of things there. Help with repair tissue and growth, things like that. So in your tongue, there's kind of these five different things here. The main portion overall of your tongue, it's almost like a combinations of things. It's this newest one we call umami, which sometimes it's kind of this like protein taste. So it might be from specific like fruits or vegetables. It's also kind of this like meat taste almost maybe like chicken or other beef or something. Sweet is located in taste bud receptors that are on the tip of your tongue. Well, kind of a little bit more just the front end of your tongue. Salty is more just the very tip. Sour is the sides of your tongue, and then bitter is the back of your tongue. So those are your five tastes you can determine: umami, sweet, salty, sour, and bitter. So the way that you actually taste food then is that you have about 50 to 100 taste receptor cells that have these little hairs, kind of like we had with hearing, that sense your food molecules. Then those food molecules are transmitted into neural messages that then go to your brain. And that's kind of how your brain takes the information from each of those different parts of your tongue that are sensitive to those different tastes and kind of combines them all together to then decide in your mind, so what do you actually taste here? And that then goes to your temporal lobes. So taste was short and sweet there, pun intended. Next, going on to smell. This is our last sense we need to cover, and it is another chemical sense. So again, the sense of smell is called olfaction. So you have olfactory receptors that are in your nose, and they respond to different things like the smell of a cake baking, of smoke, a fragrance, something like that. So let's kind of take a look at exactly what this looks like. So initially, those scents kind of come in and they end up, there are these odor receptors that then get passed on to olfactory receptors that you have in your nose. And after that, like, so it goes to this area called the olfactory bulb, which then is transmitted to your temporal lobe. And that is your brain's primary smell cortex to help you understand certain scents. But interestingly, that also then gets sent to your limbic system and different parts of your brain that have to do with memory as well. So it's interesting how smell is kind of also related to things that have to do with different emotions you feel or memories that are brought up. So just to kind of summarize all that we were saying, there's an odor molecule that comes in. It then goes to these receptor cells that are in your olfactory membranes, then to this thing called your olfactory bulb, also shown here, and eventually through the olfactory nerve gets sent then to your brain. So as you can see with each of these five senses, there is that sensation part of what is the physical thing coming in, if it's light waves, sound waves, molecule odors, any of those kinds of things that then go through this whole process in the lower side of things to transmit that energy then into something that can go to your brain for the perception side of things, where you actually determine what is this thing and is it going to lead me to react a certain way or feel a certain way. And don't forget that the thalamus is where all of your senses go through with processing in your brain, except for smell. Smell is the only one that does not go through the thalamus. So remember that, because that tends to come up on the AP exam. And as we said, with smell, it also gets sent to your limbic system and parts that have to do with memory. So you can see how all these things interact here. That information from your taste buds travel to an area between the frontal and temporal lobes of the brain. So then that information registers near where the brain receives input from your sense of smell. So that then interacts with your sense of taste. And again, it also connects with this red area that has to do with memory storage. And that is why senses of smells can sometimes trigger a certain memory. So if I smell a certain scent of cookies, it reminds me of being at home smelling my mom baking cookies. And maybe this feeling of warmth that I get of being together as a family or something. I'm going to talk about this again in a moment, but all these different senses working together is called sensory interaction. So I will come back to that more in a moment. So, as I was saying, some of these things like being exposed to a fishy smell can lead you to become more suspicious. So, that's how a scent influences certain parts of your brain, then. Or riding on a train car with a citrus scent of like a cleaning product, then people leave behind less trash because it activates something in your brain that reminds you of cleanliness. Also, this then switching gears from the sense of smell, there's kind of one last topic to cover, which kind of goes with your sense of touch a little bit, but it's basically your body's understanding of its position and movement. And there's two different senses that help with that. Those are the kinesthetic sense and vestibular sense. So the kinesthetic sense is kind of how your body understands its location and the influence of different movements of your body. So how does your body sense, here is my hand, here is my other hand, how will I get them to touch each other, something like that. Your vestibular sense is more related to your sense of balance. So it's absolutely tied in with your kinesthetic sense, but it's not as much where are my body parts, but instead, how do I maintain my balance here? And as I mentioned in our last video, the vestibular sense is influenced by things in your ear called the semicircular canals and vestibular sacs. So let's take a look at some examples here. Your kinesthetic sense, people who are dancers or basketball players, do other kinds of sports. If you do cheerleading, like poms, any of those kinds of things, you probably have a very great kinesthetic sense. You're very aware of your body's position and movements. And then vestibular sense, again, if we look at that part of the ear here, we're talking about the inner ear. These three kind of loops at the top are your semicircular canal, and then kind of where they connect down here is are the vestibular sacs. So just know that your vestibular sense is pretty much stored in your ears, and that's kind of influenced by that fluid that sloshes around in your ears. All right, so quickly here, which of the following is the best example of your kinesthetic sense? Take a moment to think about that. All right, so don't forget kinesthetic is your body's awareness of your different body parts and movements. So touching your nose with your eyes closed, that would be your kinesthetic sense. So letter A is our correct answer here. Just to also bring up letter B, maintaining balance in your chair, that would be your vestibular sense. But those two definitely kind of work together to help overall maintain your sense of balance. So to tie it all together here, how do your senses interact? Each sense can influence another. So smell impacts taste. So for example, ever realize when you have a cold how much you really can't taste things as well? That's because those kinds of things go together there. Also, you can't detect various tastes when you close your nose. So sometimes if you know you don't like the taste of something, like if you have to swallow some medicine or something, you might hold your nose and then drink it. That can definitely have an interaction there. You see visual images better when they're accompanied by noise. And there's this really cool phenomenon that we can talk about in class that has to do with that one. And again, you hear soft sounds better if paired with a visual cue. So your senses definitely play together, and that is all called sensory interaction, which I mentioned earlier. So as we were just saying, for example, like when you're video chatting with someone, which is so relevant right now, it is much easier to understand what someone is saying, not just by hearing them, but also by seeing them and seeing their facial expressions and their mouth moving as well. So, this is one reason why it is really important to have cameras on during class, because as teachers, we can pick up on visual cues from you better, and specifically if we can't hear you very well, we can still see your mouth moving and try to determine certain things about what you might be saying. So Just a side note, but it is very helpful to have your cameras on so that we can understand things better since your senses play together. And on that note, there's also this thing called embodied cognition, which goes with sensory interaction. And I think it's really fascinating. So it's basically the influence of bodily sensations, gestures, and other states on your cognitive preferences and judgments. So, for example, here, these are some really fun studies. People find that after holding a warm drink rather than a cold one, people are more likely to rate someone more warmly and feel closer to them and behave more generously. So, literally, the physical warmth of holding a warm drink then transfers to these warm feelings you feel inside about another person. Similar to that, I've seen a study where if your hands are warm before you step into like a job interview and you shake someone's hand, they tend to then rate you better than if you had a cold hand before you shake their hand. So if you're ever going for a job interview, warm up your hands real quick before you go in. Maybe not to the point they're sweaty, but just warm enough that it feels good because that makes the person have embodied cognition, which gives them warmer feelings inside. Another example, after being given the cold shoulder by others, people judge the room to be colder overall. And sitting at a wobbly desk and chair makes others' relationships, even your own romantic relationships, seem less stable. So your mind really takes into account all these different things as it's perceiving stuff. This very last thing here, super interesting, this thing called synesthesia. In some people, they have this thing where their senses are working together in a certain way that occurs differently from other people. So basically, sometimes like hearing a sound might trigger an experience of seeing a color, also, something like that. So, some examples here are like you might see this image here, and someone with synesthesia could potentially hear certain colors. So if they see the color red, maybe they hear like a loud noise, or this like bluish purple, it's some kind of colder, lower pitched noise. I don't know. It depends based on your synesthesia and how that works. So again, here, maybe different letters are associated with different colors that you see. So it's very interesting. I encourage you to read more about it. It is really interesting that this happens sometimes when people's senses work together in that way. Feel free to take a look at this sample FRQ here that then takes into account a lot of different terms throughout this unit. But that is it for the unit of sensation and perception. Great job, everybody. I always encourage you to think about how complicated all these senses are that are going on inside of you to try to want to understand it all a little bit better and think about how cool it is that your body does all these things that we don't even think about on a daily basis. So great job, everybody. We will do more in class and take care.